All right. I don't know if that's on. Can you guys hear me in the back? I don't think it's turned on either, but I didn't want to assume anything. Let's see. Welcome back. How about now? Still nope. Checking. 1, 2, 3.
I'll take a look.
No, that's yeah. All right, that's pretty promising, but also pretty loud. I think that's your answer. Yeah. All right. Are we good now? All right. Excellent. Welcome. Nice to finally let you in. My name is Amber Lloyd Cano. I'm currently a high school English teacher in my 17th year. I'm going to be transitioning to working with pre-service teachers at James Madison University. This is my 7th panel with the Virginia Festival of the Book, and I'm really happy to be here. And on behalf of the Virginia Humanities, producer of the Virginia Festival of the Book, welcome. This event is entitled Crowns and Claws, Coming of Age in YA Fantasy Fiction. The panelists today are Emily Thiede, nice, with her novel The Vicious Grace, and Andrew Joseph White with his novel Hell Followed With Us. Emily Thiede spent her childhood reading in trees and now writes fantastical tales about magic, mayhem, and characters who flirt with their enemies while the world crumbles. Her debut novel, The Vicious Grace, was an Indie Next pick, a Barnes & Noble YA Book Club pick, and a Southern Book Prize finalist. The sequel, This Cursed Light, releases this December. Fun mock-up up here so you can see it.
It's a fake one.
Yeah.
No, I don't want people to think it's ready.
Oh, yeah, no, but it's very pretty.
It's beautiful, we love it.
Yeah. When she's not writing, Emily teaches and serves as vice chair for the board of Writer House, a Charlottesville writing nonprofit, and she enjoys getting lost in the woods of Central Virginia, where she lives with her family. You can find her across social media platforms at EKT Writes. Andrew Joseph White is queer, trans, New York Times bestselling author from Virginia, where he grew up falling in love with monsters and wishing he could be one too. Andrew's books include Hell Followed With Us and the upcoming The Spirit Bares Its Teeth. He received his MFA in creative writing from George Mason University in 2022. Find him at www.andrewjosephwhite.com or on Twitter at AJWhiteAuthor. All right. Before we dive too much into the context of these books and let them talk about all kinds of different things, I thought it was apropos for us to talk about the trigger warnings in both of your books. Yeah, so each of you have a very detailed warning at the beginning of your books. How did you decide on your trigger warning, and what motivated you to include it for this particular work?
Sure. This is kind of a recent trend that has been growing in popularity in publishing, especially in YA, and I think it's wonderful because it allows people to be in the right headspace and to know what they're getting into. For mine particularly, I struggled a lot with the trigger warnings because so much of it sounds worse in the trigger warnings than it is in the book. I have a character who is convinced by people that she might be a false savior, and it's possible that the only way that a new one can rise is if she dies. It's hard to phrase something that's like, she considers maybe she should die, but she doesn't want to, isn't like a concise trigger warning. And there are just lots of things like that, and I didn't want people to be scared off by it. But I figure at the end of the day, I would rather someone be over-prepared and then go, okay, this isn't that bad after all, than go into it unexpected. and get hit by something that might upset them. So. And I'm sorry, I'll try to talk slower. The ADHD and the nerves, it's a hard combo.
I understand completely. Yeah. So at the beginning of my book, I have a letter from the author, which is a combination of a content warning and a kind of an address to all of the trans kids that read it. That's what I like to do with I have a letter from the author and everything that I write where I'm like, hey, it's going to cover some dark stuff, but don't worry, I'm on your side, I understand. And the main reason that I include them is because my books are absolutely disgusting. I write horror novels. My first 3 are for kids, and then my 4th one will be for adults. They are all as dark as my editors and publishers will allow me to go. Granted, I've never had an editor push back on anything yet, which I appreciate, but I've still had people come up to me and be like, why did you have the tooth scene? And I was like, because it was fun. So like I knew going into this, I'm like, look, this is going to be brutal, and I wrote this for kids. I just need them to know straight up that it's going to be difficult, and there are going to be parts of it that really suck. And like, I just want you to know what you're getting into, because I trust them enough to make the decision whether or not they can do it. I just want to let them know up front, because I don't want them to be blindsided by the main character pulling out one of his teeth with a pair of pliers. I'm just saying. So that feels rude.
And honestly, I think that is kind of tame compared to some of the other content.
Oh, wait till we get to the worm part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what I asked the authors to do is to find a piece from their text to read to you, to get you enticed before we really dive into a conversation. And now that we've already had our pre-warnings, we can go ahead and get into the content. I really enjoyed that Andrew's response back to me was, I'll try to find something not too rude. I was like, I laughed out loud. My husband was like, what's going on?
Right.
All right.
You seem more prepared.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm more prepared, so we'll go. So this is from the beginning of chapter 8. As the church is to Christ, a wife is to her husband, and graces are to our seraph. From Reverend Mother Woodside's notes. The flood works in stages, but they pass so quickly, you're dead by the 40th hour tops, but they blur together. It moves more like a parasite than a virus, devouring everything it touches. It starts with the insides, unraveling your organs for spare parts, and it gets into the brain so quickly that you don't notice your spine growing out of your back until you've already tried to put your teeth through the nearest piece of flesh. Seraph, though, is slow and meticulous. It has a vision in mind, and it's going to do it right. I get to see the stages play out perfectly, all in order, ticking off each box as it goes. I watched it happen to the failed seraphs before me, and now I get to watch it in the mirror. This is the second stage. Sister Kipling had a specific word for where it happens: the blood-brain barrier. The virus gets from the blood into the brain and starts twisting it the way it twists the body. The way toxoplasma makes rats love cats, the way cordyceps makes bugs hang from the stem of a leaf. It makes you more likely to pass it on, makes you angry. First you start puking up your organs, and then you get pissed. I can't say I didn't know what came over me, because I do. And I can't join the watch if I'm going to hurt the people I'm supposed to be helping. So I am going to do to Seraph what I can do to any other monster. Look it in the eye and control it. Not too bad, no vomiting or amputations.
He didn't read the key part.
And I always like to give a little concept about what my book is about, just because it's very hard to convey what the actual heart of the story is in the opening chapter, which is what I'm going to read. But my editor describes it as a rom-com embraced by a dark fantasy, and our main character has a gift from the gods that she is supposed to use to channel a partner's gift to save the world from a recurrent apocalypse. But the first 3 attempts, her partners did not survive the encounter. But it's still okay to laugh. The first time I ever did a reading, I read this opening to a group from Writer House and did not specify that. I just remember the blank stares of horror. I thought, it's okay. gallows humor is a healthy way of coping with things sometimes. I'm not going to read the Italian at the beginning because my mother is here and it would horrify her if I butchered it. So we're going to skip the Italian part. Through the divine window, light burns demons to ashes. 3 weddings, 3 funerals. A better person would have been devastated, but Alessa bowed her head to hide dry eyes as she knelt before the jewel-encrusted coffin on the altar. The temple beneath the Cittadella smelled of mildew and death, the air thick with dust motes drifting like the ghosts of fireflies. She would cry, later. She always did. Being widowed at 18 was tragic, after all, and none of her partners had deserved to die. Still, it was difficult to muster tears for yet a 3rd time. Hugo, her 3rd Fonte, and the unfortunate body before her had insisted it was only nerves when his hand trembled in hers. She should have known better. She had known better. But the gods had chosen her, and she'd chosen him. So, even knowing her touch might be his last, she'd reached for him a 2nd time. Alessa Palladino, divine weapon of the gods. Her latest wedding dress was packed away, traded for a morning gown and knee-high boots, with a black mantilla over her hair, and gloves, of course. Always gloves. Still, the dank chill reached for her bones. Even on a sun-baked island, the sun couldn't warm what it never touched. Cupping her hands as though in prayer, Alessa brewed a minuscule wind funnel between her palms. The faint echo of Hugo's gift only lasted a moment, but she offered it back to him anyway. The empty space it left behind felt like penance. Her knees ached, but she didn't stand until the last stragglers found their seats. It wasn't easy. Every minute spent mourning was one she didn't get to spend choosing her next fonte, and she didn't have time to spare, or fontes, for that matter. On one side of the aisle, the 12 members of the Concilio watched her with inscrutable eyes, always watching, always waiting. First, for her to be old enough to choose a partner, and then for her to choose another, and another after that. Soon, they'd summon her next victim, her next partner. She had to get it right this time. The Concilio would have her next choice dragged to the Cittadella at sword point if needed, but she wanted someone willing. On her way to her seat, Alessa paused to curtsy before Renata Ortiz, the previous Fenestra, whose power had winked out the day Alessa's blossomed 5 years ago. Renata nodded, cool and aloof, while her fonte, Tomohiro Miyamoto, offered a sympathetic smile. They were a good pairing, a great pairing, exactly what Fenestra and fonte should be. A familiar pull of envy threatened to drag Alessa under as they laced their hands together. She'd give anything for a hand to hold, or a hug. She would kill for a hug. Literally.
What is it about this genre of writing that really compelled you to write in this style?
I think for me it's because I get tired of the real world sometimes, and I think that fantasy offers sort of opposite ends of the same coin, which is, one, it offers escapism. If the real world is stressing you out and getting you down, it allows you to go someplace else. It allows me to create a world where things are not perfect, obviously. Apocalypse is coming again. But I can also choose which elements of our society and our world I just don't want to include, because I'm creating my own society. So if I don't want certain aspects of bigotry or homophobia to be there, I just don't put it in, because it's my world. And that allows me to go to a place where I can find the joy that maybe you can't find in the real world. And at the same time, it allows me to take real world experiences and emotions and to heighten them and exaggerate them in different ways. So much of my story is about this girl who is desperate for connection and friendship and relationships, which I think is a very normal human emotion, but just writing a contemporary book about it wouldn't have been the way for me to explore it. So instead I gave her a death touch and locked her in a castle and made it as bad as it could possibly be, because in some ways that allows me to explore it even deeper, while also knowing that I get to control the situation around it. And yeah, I didn't have a good punchline last, but yeah, all that.
Don't worry, all my answers trail off too. I'm like, that makes me sound smart, let's go with that. So I'm a big fan of horror. So I know this is technically like classified as fantasy. It's a post-apocalyptic horror. It's pretty brutal. Because I knew like from the start that I needed this to be a book about a trans kid who is a monster. Because I grew up feeling like one, and I didn't know why for so long. I'm like, oh, I'm totally normal. I'm just like everyone else. I just feel awful all the time for a reason no one could ever explain. There is clearly no reason for this. It's just me. No, it was gender dysphoria and autism. It's shocker how nobody figured that out earlier. I thought it was obvious looking back, but no.
Bean jar.
Yeah, exactly. Dumping out an entire jar of beans and then counting each one individually because I needed to sort them. How did we not know? But like writing this, I was like, if I went at this from a contemporary lens, it wouldn't hit as hard unless I could literally go, here is a trans kid who is literally turning into a giant rotting monster with like 100 teeth and 6 wings and is super nasty and gross, and everyone still loves him and cares about him anyway. And I was like, that's all I ever wanted growing up. And it hits harder, and it certainly makes more sense to people who haven't had my experience if I just put it like that. Which it's a whole giant metaphor. Everything that I do is a metaphor, and metaphors are way more fun when you get to kill people in the middle of it. So it's kind of like, oh, if I actually had our characters committing murder in contemporary, they have to deal with the law and the cops. It's like boring. I just murder with no consequences, please. I'm begging. So fantasy is obviously great for that.
In terms of the metaphor, yeah, I made it all the way to the querying stage before I realized that my entire book is a metaphor for growing up with undiagnosed ADHD.
Yes.
I mean, literally, I saw an agent who said she was looking for fantasy manuscripts that had main characters with sort of what they used to call the female presenting version of ADHD, even though that's not how things work. I remember thinking, oh, well, like, my character doesn't, but I do. Well, actually, maybe my character. Oh no. Like, oh no. This whole book is about a girl trying to figure out like why she can't do things the way that other people can do them, and in some ways she's more powerful. In other ways, it's going wrong, and like everyone makes it sound so easy. And
Oh, I need to bump this up my TBR.
So, yeah.
That's what I did with the autism, though. Yeah. The love interest is autistic, and I was like,
Whoops.
I really felt the metaphors in both of your books, and I thought they were done really well, especially for your audience. What I was wondering as a 2023 reader is if you were influenced on what was going on at all, like COVID. There's both. I know, which is why I'm interested in your answer. So in both of these works, there is some kind of imposing other, like that's changing society in some kind of way, and it just felt so real to us as readers. And so I was wondering if you were influenced at all by that.
So, as someone who wrote a book about a girl who is socially isolated, people are always surprised to find out that I finished writing this book in 2019. It sold to my editor in March 20th or something of 2020. So it was basically written and completed by then. And honestly, when we went on submission the week that New York City shut down, I thought, well, no one's going to buy this book. No one's going to want to read a book about a girl who can't get close to people and she's so lonely. Like, that's horrible. No one wants to read this right now. But it was already completed, so it really wasn't influenced. And it didn't change much after that. There were a few scenes added, and I will say there are a few brief passages that kind of refer to grief and processing loss that got a little deeper afterwards because of everything that was going on in the world and because of things that affected people that I love. But the story itself was pretty much fully baked by the time all that started.
That's incredible, truly.
It's funny because I have the exact same story. I started writing this in 2018. It went on submission to publishers like the month of lockdown, which is hilarious because this is a virus apocalypse book. The virus in this turns people into giant monsters and it kills 99% of the human population, which I had editors straight up turn it down because they couldn't handle it. I'm like, that's fine. I'm not mad, I get it. But one of the things that was really interesting is that I introduced the concept of the characters wearing face masks several months before we even started getting whiffs of what was happening. And it was very hard to describe to people. I was like, oh, so you know like the blue mask with like the metal bar here that you see surgeons wear? It's a mask, but it's only like half their face and it only goes up here. So if I say mask, do you understand what I'm saying? Now I just have to say mask and everyone's like, yeah. I was like, oh, thank God. It makes things so much easier on my part. But it did also mean that when I was like talking about this book, I didn't push the virus apocalypse angle very hard. I pushed there's giant monsters, it's post apocalyptic, there's a doomsday cult. What did they do? Um, I'm not, you'll have to read to find out. Um, so I do think that it changed the way that I marketed the book, and I also think it changed the way that my publisher marketed the book because they didn't go very hard on the virus apocalypse angle either, and they ended up going. I think the angle that they ended up taking on it was it started coming out when a late wave on the first wave I think of anti-trans legislation started to come out. So we kind of marketed it that way. It's kind of like, hey, are you angry about it? Believe me, so is this author here. And that seemed to work really well. So you know what? The way that I talk about it is just like I'm glad that the book is there for the kids that need it. But oh my God, I'm sorry you need it. Do you need a hug or a therapist? Like, I'm so sorry.
I think in that same vein, it leads into my next question about found family and connections. So it's so important to the characters in this book, and I think for most kids growing up, to find their own family, to find their own kind of central thing. Why is that theme such an important one to you to have included it when?
Sure. I, like all true YA heroines, moved when I was in the ninth grade. Moved from northern New Jersey to here in Virginia. And I will just say, Central Virginia has come a long way in the past few decades, and it was very much a culture shock. I moved in the middle of ninth grade, and then about a year and a half later, when I finally made some friends, they built a new high school and shipped me off to that one. So a defining feature of my adolescent years was going from a group of friends that I had known since I was tiny to being in a new place where I had to learn to meet new people. And a big part of Alessa's story is the importance of finding that one person who notices you for the first time, who gives you a chance, who forms any sort of friendship or relationship with you. It is a very romantic book, but I like to think that her relationship with Dante really starts with just a connection between two people who understand each other, because I think there's really nothing more powerful, especially when you're young, than just to be seen and to be recognized and to find that group. And the rest of the found family sort of developed as the book was coming along, mostly because I'm incapable of writing characters. Like, once I get too deep into any character, I start to really like them. And so as soon as an editor or an agent says, like, I want to know more about this person and this person, they become more important to me. And so then they become more important to my characters as well. So some of that sort of happens accidentally. But I also wanted to make sure that this story about a girl who is lonely and searching for connection and who she is wasn't just focused on the romance, that it's not like one person can be everything to you. And so that she does develop friendships and relationships, and I get to develop them more in the sequel, which is a lot of fun.
Oh, babe, real quick, Aunt Robin just got into the live stream, so say hi to Aunt
Oh,
Robin.
hi, Aunt Robin. So found family is like a really important part of this book. The main character gets taken in by the survivors in an LGBTQ plus youth center that survived the end of the world. And it was very much like wishful thinking on my part. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I really struggled with people. You are the only friend that I've had for like longer than a little bit. And I'm marrying you, so we see how that turned out. So I have a really hard time with like making friends, keeping friends,
She
especially.
says cool shout out.
Especially like the more people that it goes, I can only like have one or two friends at a time before it starts getting overwhelming. And I grew up in a place where, like, I'm 24, and being queer, like when I was in high school, was not talked about, was not normal. The shift that has been made has been quick and drastic. I graduated high school in 2016, and the difference between 2016 and now, astronomical. I had nothing that my main character has. The main character knows that he's trans at 16. It took me until I was 19. Took me way too long. Um, and I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have people that were like me in any way, shape, or form, let alone that I was capable of talking to for more than a sentence at a time. So I gave everything that I wanted as a kid to this character, because I also knew it was like the only way he was going to be able to survive this book, because lots of people want to kill him, and lots of people want him to turn into a giant monster and wipe out the rest of humanity. So I'm like, he kind of needs a support system. He cannot do this on his own, and I'm a little jealous, to be honest. It's like, yeah, he's turning into a giant monster, but he also has friends.
Silver lining.
I like the monster part too. I'm jealous of that too. Don't get me wrong.
I will say too, in relation, this kind of ties both of these previous two questions together, that I think for both of us, publishing moves really slowly, and so when we were writing these books, when they came out, it was a different headspace. And I loved the thought that this book I wrote, that when it was originally sold, I thought, who's going to want to read about someone being socially isolated and cut off from friendship? But by the time it came out, it was 2022, and I think there were a lot of people, especially young people, who it hit in a whole new way, and it was a way for them to kind of process that, going through that experience, and also finding a light at the end of the tunnel through fantasy in a way that doesn't hit quite as close to home when it's a fantastical reason to be separated from other people, and I hope that that's cathartic for readers.
So when I was reading through these, I felt like these were more new adult than young adult type books, especially because of some of the content within. But this, they are billed as YA. And in both of your stories, you do have a young person that is forced to carry the burden of saving the world. And so that, your audience feels that. So how do you think your stories reflect your intended audience? And in what ways do you feel your characters represent the idea of coming of age?
Well, one thing I think, it gets a little tricky in the way that we classify genres and age groups, because we have some really narrow ranges, and I know for myself, as someone who moved around a lot in high school, for someone who is neurodiverse, and just for a lot of people, the teen years don't start when you turn 13 and then end when you turn 18 and then suddenly you're an adult, and publishing kind of likes to pretend that that's the case, and I don't know about everyone here, but going to college for me was when I had a lot of firsts that other people have in high school. And so for me, this concept of like, you suddenly hit 18 and then there's an entirely different world, and you're not coming of age anymore because you are of age, is absurd. I mean, even our rules and regulations don't have that. You can vote at certain ages, you can go to war at certain ages. I mean, we know that this is a continuum. And so I think there are going to be 14-year-olds that have had much more life experience and are going to relate to more mature themes. And then there are going to be 19-year-olds that haven't had certain experiences and are going to relate to it too. So to be honest, my intended audience for this book was me. This was my, I call it a screw it book. I'd already queried 2 manuscripts. I'd written a bunch of books. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I had this idea, and I just wanted to write it to remind myself that I love stories. And so I really just self-indulgently wrote it for me and layered in a lot of what I went through as a younger person. And at the end of the day, I'm just really glad that it relates to other people, because I do believe in, I believe in revising and editing books with your audience in mind, but I believe in writing them for yourself first. And I'm just really grateful that readers have found it to be so resonant with their experiences. And I'm glad that Wednesday Books, my publisher, allows authors to explore this kind of spectrum of life experiences that are the young adult.
Yeah, I love Wednesday Books. Your publisher is great. They're awesome. So I wrote this specifically for 16-year-old me. Because 16-year-old me was also, I had the list of the 100 most disturbing books in the English language and was going down them one by one.
Did you read those on a plane to Disney World?
I did, with my one parent on one side, one parent on the other, while I was reading Hog by Samuel R. Delany. Don't do that. That book's disgusting. I was 15. But I wrote this very, very specifically for young adult audiences. Like, I knew that going in. And that seems to shock not a lot of, but some of the people that read it. I had an interview with someone who was like, I thought this was adult. I was like, no, this is YA. It has always been very specifically YA. You'll know when I'm writing an adult book. You'll know, don't worry. Yeah, just wait till you get to the worms. But one of the things that I ended up doing in this book that I do know that some people have been like, it's too hand-holdy when it comes to the trans identity bit. I'm like, well, I'm sorry that you're a 30-year-old that already knows this. But like I wrote it for a 16-year-old who is still trying to figure themselves out, right? So it's totally fine that I spend like a page like talking about the specifics of the main character's identity because he's trying to figure it out, and I know that my readers are trying to figure it out and are looking for mirrors. Um, and especially with the whole coming of age thing in this book, the main character is being forced into a very, very brutal position he does not want to carry, that is also very gendered. It's very feminized, despite the fact that it's about genocide. Um, he is seen very specifically as a female, like, monster. He's like, no, not actually that, by the way. Shocker, sorry, but no. And a lot of it is learning to grow up and break away from the ideals that have been placed upon you by other people. Because there's so much of that that you grow up with that you know, you look this way, this is what your body is, this is what you have to be. And so much of everything is the main character not only undoing his religious indoctrination, but figuring out that, you know, I'm a man, the fact that I am turning into a monster does not take that away from me, and learning to be himself beyond what his terrible, terrible mother has forced onto him, which is regrettably something that apparently a lot of my readers relate to. Again, do you all need therapy or a hug? But so much of this is growing up and realizing that the way that you were raised is terrible. Um, and learning to have to become your own person beyond that.
I will say too, especially timely right now, is I personally think it's extremely important to recognize that young readers can decide for themselves what they can handle and what they can't.
Yes.
You know, this book, a lot of times people say, oh, you know, think of the children, and I just want to say, have you seen the world? Do you know? I mean, teens these days have access to phones. They know all the things that are happening in this world. We're going to let them see what happens in this world. We're going to let them go to schools that don't feel safe. We're going to let them grow up in a time period where no one was safe for a while. And then we're going to say, oh no, what if they read a bad word? I mean, I am considerably older than Andrew, and when I was a teenager, we didn't have YA. You kind of went straight from Sweet Valley High to whatever your parents had on their shelf. And so I know for a fact that when I was 16 years old, if I would pick up a book and go, ooh, I don't like this, I'd put it back. I also have a 12 and a 10-year-old who are capable of reading just about anything. And if you want to know how many times they've tried to read my book, the answer is 0, because they don't want to. And so I know, I see it every day in my house that these young people who are so much smarter and more aware of their own needs and limitations and what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. So how can I look at my 12-year-old and say, I trust her, like I'm not locking up any books in my house. I mean, if she picks them up and reads something that's inappropriate, I might say, we should probably talk about that while you're reading it, but I trust her, so why wouldn't I trust other people's teens? Stop banning books.
Yeah. All right. I think this is a great time to take some questions for the audience. If there's anyone who would like to ask a question.
So I want to ask about like your writing process and in terms of like this idea of YA. Like I've read that you know a good percentage of people who read YA are adults. So while you're writing, are you consciously thinking, you know, monitoring what you write and is this something that a teenager would read, or are you thinking about that, or is it later once the book is written, other people evaluate that and say it falls into this category or that category?
So a question about the writing process and whether that fits into a YA kind of or adult, that's decided before or after the writing process begins.
So my imprint that published my book is Wednesday Books, which was the original new adult publisher. For a while, they tried to create a category of books that were basically for young adults, not necessarily just teenagers. And then new adults sort of got sidelined and sidetracked, and people said we're not going to do that. So it's considered a teen and older category. So when I was writing this book, again, I was just writing it for myself, but I was keeping in mind sort of certain expectations within the YA genre. And for me, the key aspect of what makes something YA versus adult is really that coming of age and having first experiences. And as long as that is the heart of the story, and that it's a character who is going through that transition in real time versus like an older person looking back on it with the wisdom of maturity, which is not YA, that would be adult. then that's really the heart of the story that makes it YA. But I do think there is flexibility in what exactly that range is. And I actually know quite a few authors in the fantasy space, especially. The line gets really blurry. There's a lot of adult fantasy where the characters are the same age as my characters, and it's just sort of how the content is presented. And so I would say I put a lot of thought into that final editing polish, especially when it comes to certain scenes, like certain romantic scenes, when it comes to making certain issues of consent clear, things like that. Because I do want to make sure that it is a responsible portrayal, which doesn't mean my characters make good choices all the time. It just means that I want it to be clear to readers. I want someone to walk away from my book having a bit of a blueprint of how to kind of be a healthy person and how to draw their own boundaries, versus an adult, I might say, like, I would give them a little more rein to kind of know where those limits are for themselves. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I go into a book knowing whether or not it's going to be YA or adult, because there is a very, very hard dividing line in how my writing looks between YA and adult. So like with my YA, so like the sort of stuff that I write, I always write about really horrible things happening, and so all of my work is looking at is like you have survived this awful, terrible thing, and all of my YA is you made it, you did it. Good. And all of my adult is, why would you do that? It's just kind of like you survived. For what? So my adult is violently more cynical. It's way more cruel. Pretty much with my YA book, I'm just like, I don't want to be the person that tells a young trans kid that what you're doing is, like, I don't want to make the world feel worse for you. You need to come out of this feeling a little better. With my adult book, I don't care what I don't care what you get out of it. This could be the most depressing, awful thing in the world, and I'm having fun. I don't care. So I have to know going in the tone that I'm going to take with the bad things happening, right? And so much of it, I remember when we were going like through this, everything that I did was very specifically for teenagers, and my editor was like, how are we going to react when adults read this? And I said, I don't care, I didn't write it for them. That's not my problem what they make of it. Especially because I started writing this when I was like 19 or 20, and it came out when I was like 22, 23. So I still barely consider myself an adult, and when it comes to my YA, I'm like, I don't care what grown-ups think of it. Oh wait, I am a grown-up. So like every now and then my editor may be like, hey, you know, just to be aware that like adult gatekeepers might have some issues with this stuff, but I know that the kids are gonna want it. So if you want to find a way to still give the kids what they want while keeping it under the radar, just keep that in mind. But it's gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't care about the gatekeepers either. Like they haven't found this book yet, so we're just gonna keep rolling with that. I'm shocked. It hasn't come up on any lists yet. I'm waiting.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen eventually.
Yes,
I mean, it does spell in the name, so I'm surprised.
Yeah. So fingers crossed.
Nobody's.
I'm swearing on a secrecy here.
That's a really good point too. That I think one thing that really to me defines the YA versus adult genre is that no matter how bad things get in YA, there usually is a hint of you still have the rest of your life ahead of you, and the world can still get better. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah. My adult book is just like everything sucks. Sorry.
Here's a worm on a string.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm serious. That needs to be the pre-order campaign. I was gonna say I'm one of those adults who reads a lot of YA. So my son's about your age, and before he was born, I was checking books out of the YA section of our library down the street. And some of the best books in the world, I think, are Ursula Le Guin's Ursi trilogy. And these are books written decades ago. They're not recent at all. The Chronicles of Narnia. These are all YA books that are some of the best books in the world. So I'm just curious, when you were that age, or even now, what authors do you read? What inspired you? Who are the authors that you read?
Questions about authors that inspire writing, YA or otherwise.
Yeah, why are those? Yeah.
Again, I did kind of jump straight into my father's science fiction and fantasy collection. So I read a lot of Anne McCaffrey, which if you are a younger reader or if you haven't read her work yet, you go into it now. Be aware times have changed. There are definitely things in those books that I'm like, oh, that's not great. Still like fantastic stories, but I loved her talent series, which is all about telepaths and telekinetics, and she has the Dragons of Pern, which is or Dragon Riders of Pern, which is science fiction, not fantasy. thing. So I read a lot of those, and she wrote a lot of those. So all of that, and I did read a lot of Ursula Le Guin and things like that. But I actually read those younger. So the things that now we would consider YA, I think I probably read in middle school, and then I was that kid in class being like, "Do I have to have as many books in my reading log? Because I read grown-up books," which does not make you very popular in 6th grade. Yeah, that was. And I think my dad had all those. The analog. They have the short story collections that would come out. I would read those. I mean, talk about filling your brain with weird ideas that will show up decades later.
Yeah, I grew up kind of like at the prime for like YA because I grew up like in the Hunger Games Divergent era, that sort of thing. I didn't read any of them, largely because I wasn't interested in any of them because all of them were straight. And it's important to note that I still thought that I was at probably that age. I still thought that I was like a straight girl. But none of them had queer men in it, so I wasn't interested. Funny how that works. I'm a bisexual man. So I wasn't interested in any of the YA because none of it actually called to me. I didn't want to read any of it. I wasn't interested. Which kind of explains why I went straight from the Magic Tree House to Stephen King. So growing up, I read a lot of Stephen King. I read a lot of Chuck Palahniuk. Yeah, yeah, I know it shows. That list of 100 most disturbing novels in the English language. So like Wasp Factory by Ian Banks and like Cows by Matthew Stokoe. Those disgusting, rancid books. And I was just reading them as a child, and eventually my mom was like, "Should we have kept an eye on you?" I was like, "Probably, but you didn't, so it's a little late now."
Look where I got you.
So I didn't read YA like specifically because like none of it was interesting to what I wanted. But I did read this one series. It was called Escape from Furnace by Alexander Gordon Smith. It was not overtly gay, but it was the most homoerotic thing I'd ever read in my life. And it was about this teenage boy who got sent to an underground prison for children where they were slowly turned to these giant monsters and used for like mining labor. It was horrific. It was terrifying. It was so gross. I loved it so much. And when he got turned into a monster halfway through the series, I was devastated when he got fixed and they turned him back. I was so upset. I was like, no, keep him that way. He's cuter that way. He's like, yeah, I know he's like 7 feet tall and like horrifically like malformed. I love him anyway. Don't change him. He's perfect. So
I'll say Katniss is an ace.
that's very true. I love her very much.
Yeah, just thought it was more subtle.
Exactly. I love her.
Could you both say a little bit more about how new adult fiction fits between young adult and adult?
Sure. Well, new adult doesn't exist. It just does. They just basically originally, I think it was Wednesday Books, basically, or St. Martin's Press, that wanted to create a category that was supposed to be for slightly older, slightly more mature content than YA, but then 50 Shades of Grey hit, and that was the first big new adult breakthrough, and so new adult then became accidentally synonymous with
Horny?
yeah.
Erotica, just
Yes,
say it.
exactly. And because of that, then it just became so streamlined that they wouldn't allow anything else to be called NA. So basically all the publishers said, just kidding, never mind. And the bookstore said, we're not going to make a section for that. So again, St. Martin's Press said, fine, we'll just have a young adult and beyond imprint, which basically is new adult. And that doesn't mean all their books would be considered new adult, but they encompass that range. But yeah, so basically if you go out in the world and market a book, say if you're a self-published author, if you market it as new adult, what you're basically telling people is it has a lot of the themes and experiences of young adults, but it's probably going to be sexier. But that's not what it's supposed to be. That just is what it has become. Personally, I will lobby for the end of time. Teen and young adult. You can have teen and young adult, middle grade to teen and young adult, where there would still be a lot of overlap there, but I think it would be amazing if we had a category that encompassed this kind of transitional phase from middle school, younger teen years, that you could expect it to contain fewer of those adult content, and then have young adult that would really be that 16 and up, because again, I just feel like the life experiences of a 13-year-old are very different than a 16, 17-year-old, but a 16 and 17-year-old can have very similar experiences to a 20 and 21-year-old, depending on their life experience. But yes, in publishing, officially in traditional publishing, new adult is not a thing.
Yeah, so you know me better. My adult book, would you classify it as new adult if that existed?
I don't think so.
Okay, interesting,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know how old your protagonist
He's
is.
22, 23.
Infant.
Yeah,
But
I know.
also, no, because that's fucking disgusting. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the book is nasty.
I,
Well, like,
sorry I said that, but,
sorry,
yeah.
Aunt Robin.
Yeah, no, because that's not, like,
Because I do think that new adult, along with the sexier bit, kind of got its start as like a fantasy slash contemporary sort of thing.
Yeah.
also
And
more, like, transitional, and that
Yeah.
character's not transitioning anything besides gender, and
Yeah.
into mad at worms.
But there are very few like college age books.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Oh, and all
Which
of the
is
college
ridiculous.
age books that I've read have been YA. So like Fangirl and oh geez, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Oh, I'm blanking.
Loveless?
No, I'm blanking so hard. I'm embarrassed. Well, it's not technically in college, but The Project by Courtney Summers, which was put out by Wednesdays as a 19-year-old protagonist, and it's technically YA. Everything Courtney Summers does is amazing. Please read her books.
You will
But
cry.
the way that I see it happening now is that like a lot of new adult got subsumed into adult, and it's just hard to tell the difference. Like you just have to pick up a book and check the age of the main character, because otherwise you're never gonna know.
Unless it's in fantasy.
Unless it's in
the
fantasy.
age ranges are different.
Well, granted, if it's a fantasy written by a woman, you're gonna find it in YA half the time, even though it's not.
That's actually really how the categories got started. They kept going, but you're a girl book. You need to be for the teens. And then they were like, all right, oh no, all these books are selling really well. What do we do? And then adult fantasy kind of went like, wait, we want some of that too. And
Me, like, just me carefully removing Sarah J. Maas from the YA. For the young adult, please.
That's why there's so much funniness there.
That was like, just please, thank you. It's so weird, because I know that YA is relatively new, and then like the separation between like middle grade and YA is new, because it was just like adult books and not adult books for the longest time. And then maybe you'll get like easy readers.
That's why some people think Harry Potter is YA. It's not. It's middle grade.
Exactly.
The characters get as old as teens.
But it's still technically middle grade, exactly. So it's so weird. Publishing is a disaster of an industry. I never know why it does anything that it does. It's just, besides money. If it's doing something, it's probably for the money.
And they're really just marketing categories.
They are.
They
It's
are.
really
Authors are writing what they want to write, and they're just trying to figure out how to make sure that the readers who want it can find it. And in fantasy specifically, it gets tricky because, as we've discussed, a almost majority or majority of readers of young adult fantasy are actually adults, and I think that is because for a very long time, adult fantasy wasn't providing. Not saying anymore, but for a while they weren't providing as many of those faster paced, very like interior, often having female main characters. And so YA was an easy shortcut to tell people like this is a book that you will like. And now there are a lot more of those books in adult, but it's like you said, it can be hard to find them because once they're just lumped in with adult, there's a lot of different audiences for those books.
Thank you.
I believe we have time for one more question from the audience, if there's anybody else who'd like to ask a question.
So you mentioned Samuel Delany earlier. Have you read Triton by Samuel Delany?
No, only Hog.
Okay. Right. So Triton, when I was, was published in the early '70s, and it was like the first. When I went back and read it again, the protagonist is transgender, and I had no idea, but I just loved that book growing up. So it just piqued my curiosity.
Guess I need to read it now.
Yeah.
What are you both working on now? What can we get excited about?
Worms. Yeah. I just turned in the sequel about a month ago, so I've pretty much been lying on the floor and staring at the ceiling, and kind of waiting to get copy edits back, because that is usually a really fun part of the publishing process, where suddenly they send it back and they're like, you have 2 weeks and not a minute more, and you have to make sure it's perfect, because then we're going to put it in a PDF and you can't touch it. So I'm just sort of bracing myself for that. But I do have an idea for my option book, and so cross your fingers that my publishers want to buy it. But I can't talk about it because, secret.
They have Wednesday Books has a sniper waiting. I actually just got copy edits back on my next book, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. Again, 2 weeks. And on top of that, I also have to do historical accuracy edits and a last round of developmental edits because I broke the ending of this 3 times. So they're giving me 2 weeks to do all of that, and I have a 9 to 5.
Oh dear.
I'm okay. It's fine. But on top of that, so this comes out in September. I have another young adult book called, its current title is Compound Fracture, coming out in 24, and then my first adult book comes out in 25. And so we'll see where it goes from there. I really love all of them. It just gets worse. It just gets darker as it goes. This is about an autistic trans boy in Victorian England who refuses an arranged marriage and is sent to a sanatorium about it. And also there's ghosts. Yeah, there's ghosts, and they're actually extremely important. Compound Fracture is about an autistic trans boy in West Virginia who has to kill a bunch of his classmates at the behest of one of his ancestors because the classmates tried to kill him first and it didn't work. And then the adult book is about an autistic trans man in West Virginia. I read what I know in West Virginia, who discovers that he is pregnant and carrying a terrible monster worm thing that he does not want, and his boyfriend will not let him get rid of it. And it is just 9 months of him descending into paranoia and the most unhinged, violent actions that I've ever written in a book. I'm very excited. It's going to be awful. So I hope you're excited.
And I will say, shameless plug, because Andrew's more prolific than I have been and has sold a bunch of books. I have not tried yet. But if you have read This Vicious Grace, or you plan to, and you would like my publisher to buy more books from me, the best thing you can do is to pre-order the sequel. Because if those pre-orders start rolling in and I show up going, hey, I have a book, and I'll figure out a plot later, they're much more likely to hit the button. So you can make that happen.
Get those pre-orders in.
And review them on Goodreads and Amazon.
Yes.
Books are sold. On that note, thank you for being here, and thank you from the Virginia Festival of the Book. If you do any posts on social media, please tag the Virginia Festival of the Book in them. If you have yet to purchase one of these books, please do so up front where they're standing, or more in the middle, where they are. And thank you for being here. Thank you both for being here.